Hi, Kristina.
Hi, Joe.
How are you?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm excellent. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I can't believe I just looked at it and went, I don't have anything to do with jazz. Like, what happened here?
It happens all the time. When I started it, I kind of moved off I split my podcast up between my jazz and the famous interviews, but I
hmm
can't put that up there because when you establish it, you can't switch things out.
Oh, wow. How
So if I, exactly.
interesting.
So if I did that, I would lose my whole history.
Oh
Like,
my gosh.
yeah,
Okay.
it would be
Okay.
like a Groundhog Day, clean slate. And I didn't want to do that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You have the absolute perfect radio voice. I'm like,
Well,
oh my
thank you.
gosh, I love it.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. I've been working on it for a long time. I was I was 4'11" in high school, so I had to find some way to find strength and leverage. So I went with the voice.
Nice.
So
My son is 19 now, and my late husband was shorter than me. He was about 5'5", and my son is 5'4",
yeah,
fully grown. And he kind of went through a struggle with his height, but
yeah,
um, I don't know. I think stuff like that makes you stronger and
it
tougher
does.
and more successful in the end. I do.
Yeah, it definitely does. Yeah, my hero, and I still admire him quite a bit, is Bob Costas, and I got to see him at a sports broadcasting camp back in like 93 or something like that. And he said the first job that he ever got, he was going to do minor league ice hockey, and he set the recorder at the end of the room to play the audition for the guy that owned the team so that his voice would boom through the room. So there's always little tricks of the trade, and even him, for as mighty as he is, he had to figure it out in the beginning. So it's interesting how
Yeah,
things roll for
I
sure.
know. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but at any rate, I want to begin everything with you before we get into your life as an author and a host to ask you how you got through COVID. How did you get through that time period now that the world's waking up? And how has it changed the way that you do things now?
Oh, what a great question. So I think for me, ironically, I know COVID really caused a huge amount of anxiety for a lot of people. And I can be an anxious person, but something happened where I believe I actually had COVID before everything shut down.
Yeah.
I had actually traveled to Australia with my son in early January of 2020, and we were, in some of the more popular tourist spots. There were a lot of Chinese tourists that sounded deathly ill. I mean, they sounded like they had pneumonia. They were coughing really, really hard, and I thought, wow, you know, people are really sick. There was a lot of coughing on planes and everything. So on our way back, yeah, long story short, I got sick, and I didn't get super sick, but I got sick, and then all this talk was coming out about COVID, and there then talk started coming out about there being also gastro symptoms as well, and I fit the bill for all of it. So I went into it like I really felt in my gut that I had already had it, because now they're
Yeah.
saying, it was circulating months before
Yes.
they shut things down. And I even went, I mean, I had a trip scheduled to go to Morocco. I love to travel. I'm a world traveler with a girlfriend, and they wouldn't give us our money back, like because it was scheduled for mid-March and nothing had shut down yet. And they said, if you cancel, you don't get your money back. So we said, screw it. We're going to go anyway. We were there. We spent the night in the Sahara Desert, came back out and found out that the king had just shut the country down, and he was giving 2 days for foreigners to get out. Our driver had to drive, bless his heart, he had to drive for 12 hours straight to get us to Casablanca. And I gave him $500 because I was just like, we couldn't do this without you. We
Wow.
had to use our phones to try to get on a flight. The only flight we could get on was to New York City, which was blowing up with COVID. Nobody wanted to be there. So we get off the plane. People in astronaut suits are poking us. They're taking our temperature. They're doing stuff. We had to spend the night in New York, then flew back to the West Coast. And long story short, um that the next day my friend started getting symptoms. My son was over at her house. Her whole family got really, really sick. My son got really, really sick. And I didn't believe in the whole Lysol the doorknobs thing, because if people are coughing into the air, we had no masks because
Yeah,
there weren't any available. I didn't, there was no protecting me, and I didn't get sick. So, I mean, it's a really weird, unusual situation, but I felt very confident, especially after the second incident. And of course, then even when they were all sick, there were no tests. So
yeah,
we'll never be able to prove anything.
yeah.
But so I just did not have that horrible fear that so many people had during COVID. I think it was the hardest on people with small children, because small children want to be out and about playing with other kids.
Yeah.
And my son was a teenager, and I am just so blessed and thankful that um, the high school, his group of friends, we as parents agreed to let our kids, they were way into skateboarding. My kid was 16 at the time. So we just let our kids go bike riding,
Yep.
skateboarding, wearing a mask, social distancing. And then when summer came along, they got to go, inner tubing on the river near our house and
Yeah.
swimming, and, but it just outdoor activities. And so he never lost contact with his friends, so to speak. And I know some kids had a really rough time doing online school, and it just depends on your kid. I think it depends on how your kid's brain works. And my kid did fine with online school. I mean, he didn't love it. He would have much rather been in school, but he did fine. So I didn't have the struggles that so many people had.
Sure. But that's a very unique story you have. I
It
remember the
is.
very beginning. I think Tom Hanks, when he got it, he was in Australia when he got it in the beginning.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah. Um, so let's get to the essence of what you do for a living. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of third graders, career day. One of the kids looks up and says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer that child?
Two things. Um, I used to be a financial advisor for others, but now I just manage my own money. So I'm a finance person, and I am a podcaster. So I have a podcast called She's Brave. I've just been approached by my first sponsor. My podcast was launched on my late husband's birthday, January 2nd, 2023. I've skyrocketed to the top 2.5% in 6 months. So I'm just in the beginning phases of my new career, but having a ball.
Congratulations. So, what about when you were in the third grade? What did you want to be when you grew up?
Uh, Oh, wow, I love your questions, Joe.
Thank
I
you.
wanted to be a school teacher. I wanted to be a school teacher my whole life. I do love teaching, and I think that's why podcasting's been really great for me, because I feel like there's a really strong teaching component,
Hmm.
especially when I'm the host and I ask my guest questions, and I feel like my listeners are learning a lot.
Yeah.
So I grew up in Canada, and Canada teachers are actually, they're paid more. I mean, I don't know how else to put it, but they are respected more. So I did come to go to college in the States, and I started out in teaching immediately. And I'm so glad that within the first 6 months, they did have a unique program where I got to start working in the classroom right away.
Yeah.
So within 6 months, I was in a high school classroom working with two teachers, and both of them pulled me aside individually and told me, do not go into this profession. Do not. It's, you won't be happy. Teachers are not happy. They're underpaid. They're undervalued. It's really hard. The kids nowadays are really hard. And I actually believed them and took their advice, and then went to my career center, did all of the aptitude tests, and it came back that I should get a business degree. So that's what I did.
Wow.
Mhm.
There's a show on HBO about a machine that spits out what you're supposed to do with your life. It's very interesting. And
Oh.
there's all these people, like there was one guy that was actually teacher in their main character, and it came out and said teacher, but it's like a couple other people or a handful of other people have these things, and it's causing this kind of midlife crisis in them. It's interesting how it all works. But it's funny you
Yeah.
say that because it's like they told you what you should have done. Um, so that's very interesting. Um, let's go back to your childhood. Talk to me a
Mhm.
little bit about how these seeds got into you to get into finance and to ultimately get into podcasting and wanting to even be a teacher.
Yeah, so my father comes from a tiny country called Estonia below Finland, and
Yeah.
World War II broke out when he was 10. So he lived in four different countries, attended school in four different countries, learned four different languages during World War II, ended up in Canada at age 17, learned English. He wanted to actually go into banking and finance. What's funny, Joe, is he never told me this because I think he always wanted me to pick whatever I wanted for my career, but his first choice was banking and finance. That was his passion. But that at that time in the 1950s in Canada, they were very racist. Even though my dad was blonde hair and blue eyed, he had an Estonian accent.
Oh, wow.
And in Canada, the banking industry was you had to be either British or, like Canadian, true Canadian, not with an accent.
Wow.
So they would not let him into that industry. Um, so he was just working in a lab and he ended up going to McGill, which is the Ivy League of Canada. And he ended up becoming a chemical engineer. So that's what he did. But when I was growing up, he still loved finance. So he always managed our investments. And as a child, we got all these envelopes in the mail from these investment companies. So when I was about 12, I got curious and I said, Dad, like what are these envelopes? Like they're from these companies called Prudential or this or that and Templeton and he said, well, it's, I invest. And so then I just started asking him questions about investing and how it works. And, you know, investing is pretty magical because if you can just put your money in and leave it, for a very long period of time, it just compounds. And even if we have massive, we could be coming up on a pretty bad recession, but if you can just keep your money in, it eventually always goes higher. You can look at a chart starting back in the 20s and it's fascinating to look at a chart from the 1920s until today because it goes up and then it goes slightly down and then it goes up and then it goes slightly down, but the overall trend is
Mhm.
always up.
Yeah.
So when you actually visually see, I had that poster, I had it framed in my office when I was a financial advisor because when people visually see that all the downward trends are very temporary, it feels like forever at the time, but the overall trend of the market is up, then it's like magic.
Yeah, for sure. So who's been kind of a role model for you in your life?
My dad,
Yeah.
my dad. I mean, how do you
Yeah.
go to school in four different countries and learn four different languages and then at age 17 have to learn English? And I mean, why would you even think you could go to college? you
Yeah.
know, you're
Yeah.
learning English, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
wild. So
Yeah.
if you could meet any, I mean, as a podcast host, if you could interview anybody on the planet right now, who would be a dream interview for you?
Oh, wow. I have I have a lot. I have a lot of people. Um, I guess I mean Eckhart Tolle's one of them. I never understood him until I took Oprah's book class where she literally would go chapter by chapter and he and she would discuss it and it was fascinating. So then I understood the concept better. Because I think that he has a powerful message. Um uh, I mean there's so many there's a guy called Hal Elrod And I do think I'm going to get him on my podcast. He wrote a book called Magical Morning, and it's about, he studied the 6 habits of the most successful people on the planet. Like, what do they do when they wake up in the morning? And there was a pattern, and it was 6 different things. And not everybody does all 6, but it's a book about the 6 things. And I heard him interviewed about 6 months ago, and I had kind of been doing some of those things, but that was the final, like, it really motivated me to always get up in the morning, to write a gratitude practice. I have a gratitude partner. So she and I email each other our gratitudes. It's accountability. I do a 10 to 15-minute yoga program, keeps your back strong. I mean, it's so freaking easy. It's not that long. You don't want to have a bad back it. It's great. I do 10 to 15 minutes of meditation and or prayer. So you don't even have to be religious. You can just, there's something about being still, and I feel like it makes us more open to possibility when we're still.
Yeah.
um and then writing for at least 7 minutes. And then there's a couple other ones you can do: affirmations, and let's see, the 6th one is let's see, affirmations and visualizations.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't happen to really do those 2 at the moment, and he even says don't feel like you have to do all 6, but I really want to have him on. I'm already having some of my dream guests on my podcast. Probably, if you'd asked me this a couple of weeks ago, I would have told you a woman named Lori Zaleski. She wrote a book called Funny Farm that came out a year or 2 ago. It's an autobiography. It's about her mom literally escaping with her 3 kids, her Lori being one of them. Her father would have killed her mother, and them starting over again, and eventually doing a rescue farm. And Lori's just an amazing human being. And I just interviewed her a couple of weeks ago.
Awesome.
So she's really excited to work with me going forward. And her interview, I'm pretty backed up on interviews. So she's coming out, I think, in about a month. That was
Okay.
one of my dream guests. Catherine Switzer, the first woman who ran the Boston Marathon in 1967. There's a picture of her, one of the top 100 most influential photos ever taken. It's of her, and it's of someone trying to tear off her number off
Oh,
the
wow.
Boston Marathon. So she's coming on my podcast in August. That was a dream for me. So I'm
Yeah.
starting to reach out to some of my dream people.
Yeah, that's great. As you should. That's wonderful. What is, you mentioned the 6 habits.
Mhm.
What is the ultimate fire for you to do what you do? What is the motivator for you every day to do the things that you want to get done?
Wow, such a great question. I think I I married a man a lot older than I was. He was 24 years older, and when our son was 5, he developed early onset Alzheimer's disease, and it was a 12-year journey of caring for him and raising our son. I felt very alone at the time, and at the beginning of the journey, I did get really overwhelmed, and I was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, which I've had people laugh, and in a good way, laugh and joke with me about. Well, who wouldn't be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder in that
Yeah.
situation?
Yeah.
But I didn't start out brave, and yeah, bravery is a muscle that you learn how to develop in yourself. And I think so many people think that, like in my example, I could have just used that diagnosis at the time as an excuse. Well, I can't accomplish anything because I have this disorder. And I think we use a lot of excuses to not get or accomplish our dreams. And in my opinion, there are no excuses. We just work around them.
Hmm.
And so, really, what happened was my husband passed away 2.5 years ago. And then my son graduated from high school a year ago, and I got remarried a year ago. And I was in a whole new chapter, Joe. And, you know, I had really dedicated my life to my son and my husband. And that's what felt right to me. And I had made a lot of unconventional decisions along the way. And it had, I had realized that number one, I'd learned to become brave, even though I didn't start that way. So if I can do it with that diagnosis, anybody can do it. And number two, what comes with bravery is authenticity. And when you're authentic, when you do whatever is good best for you and you don't care what the rest of the world thinks, you do, and you just know. It's like other people sense it, and they stop questioning your decisions even if they are unconventional. And I've never seen a person without two qualities with two qualities that isn't happy and living a successful life. And the two qualities are gratitude and authenticity. If you think about it, what we all really want is the feeling of expansion. And why do we think we want that money or fame? Is because we want to feel expanded. But when you're not living authentically, you're not, and you're not people pleasing, you're not trying to belong because you belong to yourself and you're grateful and you want to, basically what happens is you go in a room and people sense it. They sense that authenticity, and you're like a light in the world. And so I didn't know what I wanted to do, Joe. I did want to write a book, but I was too scared to do it at the time. So clarity comes from action. Sometimes you just got to get out there and do something. So I signed
Yeah.
up for a podcasting class, and I was forced into, well, not really. I had to reach out to people who knew me the best and ask them what my strengths were. 5, 6 people, and I'm telling you, I think everybody should do that at some point in your life because it was eye-opening. And they all said the same thing. They said, you're brave, you're resilient, you're authentic, you don't care what other people think, you live your life on your own terms. I don't think we can be happy if we don't live our life on our own terms. If we're
Mhm.
worrying about what the neighbors think, then we're living their life. We're not even living our own life. We're not free.
Yeah. Yeah. I,
And
I, I yeah,
yeah.
I totally get it. So of all of these things that you've done and overcome, as you've mentioned, what are you the proudest of? What is the thing that you've done that brings you the most pride?
Oh, wow. That's that's a good one too. Hmm. I think I think overcoming my anxiety and becoming a courageous person and learning and becoming an authentic person, because I'm really happy. I have a really great life because I can live so authentically. And I don't even, like what I said, I don't even really get challenged by it because I'm a force to be reckoned with. I walk in a room, people want to know my story, great, but I think they sense there's just such a, I'm so authentic about it. What's their question?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's kind of dig a little deeper into that. Everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, listeners, fans, colleagues, clients, but you ultimately live your life. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think I think I'm a person that radiates a lot of love, and I just instantly love people everywhere I go. I travel the world, and I find that people are nice everywhere. And maybe it's just because I emanate that. So even if the person maybe isn't so nice, like I come across so nice that they're just like, "Oh, I really like you. I want to help you." So
Yeah.
they help me. I think a lot of people perceive me as this incredibly courageous person who started a podcast and has no fear. But the truth of the reality is that courage is not just feeling courageous all the time. Courage is waking up every morning feeling a little bit on edge, and not, or most mornings, and just doing it anyway. Courage is just, feeling afraid to reach out to, that famous author and just saying, I'm going to do it anyway. Like I feel fearful, but I'm going to do it anyway. So I think there's really a myth out there that if you're feeling any kind of fear that you aren't brave, but what bravery really is, just sometimes I like to joke. I take fear by the hand. I'm like, come on, you can come with me. You don't have to come with me, or you can come with me. I'm gonna do this thing with or without you. So sometimes she just goes away, right? Like that feeling goes away. Sometimes it doesn't, but I'm still gonna do it. So I think there's a bit of a misconception that I'm like this, superhero brave woman who isn't afraid of anything. I have fear. I just bulldoze through it.
So if anyone wants to learn more about you, your story, your podcast, anything pertaining to your world, where's the best place for people to go?
My podcast. So I'm on Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and like 10 other places. You can find me everywhere. My podcast is called She's Brave with Kristina Driscoll, and I'm in the top 2.5%. I think I mentioned. I also have a website, www.she'sbravepodcast.com. You can find me on Instagram at She's Brave Podcast. Also, I have a Facebook group, She's Brave Podcast.
Excellent, Kristina. This is the message is so great. I mean, it is really about overcoming and finding that courage. That's the bottom line with everybody. So,
Yes.
you got a 50-50 shot with whatever you do, so you might as well go for it.
Love it. Love it, Joe.
Hey, this has been great. Thank you very much for agreeing to do it, to be a part of this. And, we didn't get into the jazz, but we got into the real good stuff. So I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me on your show, Joe.
Absolutely. Thank you. Best of luck.
Thanks. You too.
Take care.